Cognition is a mental process which involves attention, memory, production and understanding of language, and problem solving and memorization or making decisions. One of the important tenets of cognitive linguistics is meaning. Everything in language is permeated with meaning. Therefore, according to the slide, meaning is a matter of conceptualization of how particular language users construe the world subjectively and under the influence of specific cultural surroundings they find themselves in. A cognitive theory of language sees second language cognition as a reasoning and thinking process which involves deliberate use of learning strategies. The cognitive method of language, therefore, has certain active processes. These active processes are to know how to figure out the meaning of new words based on the context in which they occur, to know the steps or actions in order to remember vocabulary and grammar rules, and to know how to communicate with a second language speaker when all the expressions are known and not known. For many decades, ELT has undergone various experimentation with approaches and methods, and it has experienced many changes. Since the 1960s, with the development of cognitive psychology, researchers began to focus on the learners and the learning process. Cognitive psychology focused on the learner, and it sees the learner as not as a passive listener but as an active thinker and a problem solver. The focus of ELT has been shifted from how to teach to how students learn. Piaget's notion of equilibration is a cognitive construct. Equilibration is defined as a progressive interior organization of knowledge in a stepwise fashion. Thus, from the diagram we see that there are 4 stages, 2 of which belong to disequilibrium, stage 1 and 2, and 2 belongs to equilibrium. So, stage 1 is doubt, stage 2 uncertainty, stage 3 resolution, and stage 4 certainty. So, cognition develops as a process of moving from disequilibrium to equilibrium, that is, it starts from doubt and uncertainty to stages of resolution and certainty, and the periods of disequilibrium develops until the age of 14 and 15, that is when the language form operations are firmly organized. So, cognitive theories and models which are in practice for second language acquisition are controlled automatic processing, number 1, number 2 focal or peripheral, number 3 restructuring, number 4 implicit or explicit, number 5 unanalyzed or analyzed, and number 6 form focused instruction. Of this, controlled and automatic processing is McLaughlin's theory, which states capacity limited and temporary and shifts to the limited and permanent performance in communicative situation. So, the capacity limited shifts to unlimited and temporary shifts to permanent performance in communicative situation. Focal and peripheral, that is the attention to task, focal attention, that is intensive reading for example, and peripheral attention is skimming. Restructuring, that is the components of a task are coordinated, integrated, reorganized into new units, simplified for the purpose of simplification of the text. This simplification can be in terms of cohesion or coherence. For example, reading for a gist activity which you want to develop for your learners, or which one wants to develop for one's learners. Implicit versus explicit, this is information. Implicit information, that is automatically and spontaneously used in language tasks. For example, this can be phonological task, syntactic task, semantic task, or pragmatic task, or the rules, that is learning the rules for language. And explicit information is the known facts of language and their articulation, for example, the normal conversational exercises. Next I come to unanalyzed and analyzed. So, from implicit versus explicit, here the theory is from Alan Bialystok, whereas the first 3 are from McLaughlin. So, analyzed and unanalyzed knowledge. So, unanalyzed knowledge is the general form in which we know most things without being aware of the structure of that knowledge. For example, native speakers, the knowledge of the native speakers, the native speakers have mastered their native language without being aware of the concept of phoneme or phonological processes, being aware of the phonological processes. So, this is unanalyzed knowledge, whereas analyzed knowledge is being aware of the structure. That is, when one is aware of the features of the language, when one has studied it for a number of years or have mastered them. And for example, if you want to see the shift from Old English to Middle English or from Old Bengali to Middle Bengali, what are the phonological processes or the phonetic changes. So, if one is aware of the structure, one can analyze those in terms of a diachronic study. My next point is form focused instruction, that is processing time in second language performance. The length of the time that a learner takes before oral production performance indicates the perceived complexity of the language forms in task. The learner acquiring a first language at school has to be aware of what language is, that is, being aware of the symbolic representation of the language, of phonological structure, of grammatical structure, and so on. Whereas, in the case of second language, when the learner is coming to learn the second language, the learner is aware of the potentials of the language, that is the language forms which are there in the first language knowledge which the learner has, and can go straight on to discovery to discover how that potential is realized in second language. So, we have a number of assumptions of the cognitive approach here. First is language, second language learning, third aims in language teaching, fourth comprehension and production, fifth imitation and production, sixth practice, seventh drills and repetition, 8 attitudes towards students' mistakes, 9 rules of language, and 10 language skills. So, the cognitive approach assumes language to be or considers language to be highly complex system of rules, and second language learning is the comprehension of these rules of language, and therefore, these rules enable the student to produce unlimited sentences, to create sentences which the student has never heard before, and thus language is not mere repetition of identical responses to previously met stimuli. Aims in language teaching. The goal of language teaching is the development of cognitive competence, and the ultimate product of language acquisition device, that is LAD, is to internalize the system of rules which underlie both comprehension and production. Imitation and production, these are non-synonymous with comprehension, and their use has to be therefore carefully graded. Practice can only be done on patterns that have already been discovered. So, the learner can discover the patterns of certain grammatical point, for example, or grammatical features, for example. The learner has to hypothesize or generalize those rules first and then practice those rules. Perception of patterns and attempts of speaking by hypothesizing about language are more emphasized for practice. Situations are preconditions, so there has to be situations created. So, there has to be some pre-task activities always. Pre-tasks are situations. Situations are mere preconditions for activation of LAD, and over repetition has to be avoided, because over repetition leads to weakening or cause total lapse in meaning of the repeated word or sentence. Seventh point is drills and repetition. So, an important feature of drilling technique is when they have to be used. So, it is acquainted that the students it has to be acquainted with the student with the rules of the language first. Attitudes towards students' mistakes. Student mistakes are considered as necessary and natural. Therefore, it is a feature of the language while progressing in the second language. So, when can one go for correcting the student? It is unnecessary to correct the student immediately if she or he has conveyed his or her meaning. So, the corrections can be kept for the time being. Number 9, rules of language. Semi-grammatical sentences are accepted as normal stage towards native-like competence. So, there should be exercises for enabling the student to distinguish between grammatical and semi-grammatical sentences, and it is considered to be mandatory in a second language course. 10th point is language skill. Speaking and writing are distinct representations of the language. Therefore, practice in the practice in speaking should complement practice in writing in learning, and vice versa. Practice in writing should complement practice in speaking. These are also integrated skills. We have taken the other skills when the focus is on one skill, then the other skills are taken to be integrated skills which are necessary for skill development. So, any of the 4 skills can be given predominance according to the objective which the teacher has in mind. So, if the teacher has in mind some reading activity, then the emphasis should also be given to listening, because listening can be considered as an integrated skill for this case. The process of language learning is mainly determined by forces inside the child which the child brings with him. So, the child can bring with him a certain learning strategy, whereas others can be of different learning strategies. The task of the teacher is to integrate these different learning strategies so that the learners can benefit from one another. The cognitive approach deals with mental processes like memory and problem solving. So, by emphasizing the mental processes, it places itself on opposition with the behaviorist model, which do not give importance to the mental processes. And most people take memory for granted unless they forget something. So, the fact that we remember more often than we forget tends to lead us to overlook the underlying complexity of memory as a cognitive process. And in the permanent long-term memory, there are different ways that information and experience can be represented. Let us take a simple example. If you ask your friend to name the names of the months according to the calendar year, and count the time which the friend would take, then we can find out that it would take roughly 8 seconds. Whereas, if you ask the same person to name the months of the year alphabetically, then it will take less than 2 minutes. This happens because it has to do with how information is organized in the memory. Most people learn and remember the months according to the calendar order, and when they are asked to recall in alphabetical order, there is a mismatch between the encoding and the retrieval task. So, there is a mismatch between encoding and retrieval. As a result, the answering requires retrieving all the names first in the calendar order and keeping them in immediate memory, then sorting them out alphabetically, which is a working memory task. Cognitive research thus is concerned with the mental processes involved in language acquisition and how they can explain the nature of the learner's language. So, this area of research is more general area of cognitive science and uses many concepts and models used in more general cognitive theories of learning. The dominant model in cognitive approach is the computational model in second language acquisition. Computational model has 3 stages. Stage 1, learners retain certain features of language input in short term memory. This retained input is the intake. Stage 2, learners convert some of this intake into second language knowledge. This is stored in the long term memory. And stage 3, learners use this second language knowledge to produce spoken output. So, these are the 3 stages of the computational model which comes one after another, right from input to output, from retention to output. Cognitive theories attempt to codify both the nature of the mental representations of intake, that is the nature of the mental representations and the mental processes which underline these stages. So, thank you for listening.